I arrived at the ski resort on December 3, 2001. I put on my ski equipment and excitedly rushed to the gondola. When the gondola reached the top of the mountain, I saw a beautiful white snow covering the surrounding mountains, which made me feel extra excited. I glided down the ski slope, enjoying the speed and freedom. Suddenly, I came across an icy area. My body lost its balance and I fell heavily to the ground. I felt a sharp pain spread through my fingers. I saw my thumb bent into a strange shape. I realized that my thumb was probably broken. I tried to squeeze my finger hard, but the pain became more intense. I rushed to find a nearby staff member. When I arrived at the hospital, my finger was already very swollen. After an initial examination, the doctor told me I needed surgery because I had broken my thumb. I felt very scared, but I knew it was necessary. The staff quickly scheduled me for surgery and took me to the operating room. An anesthesiologist and a nurse were preparing to put me under anesthesia. However, the anesthesiologist left on short notice, leaving only the nurse behind. Not long after, I suddenly felt dizzy. My breathing became more and more difficult, as if something was pressing on my chest. I felt like I was going to suffocate. I started to feel very scared and didn't know what was happening. I tried to scream, but something seemed to be stuck in my throat. My consciousness was getting fuzzy and everything around me started to become a blur. I later learned that the anesthetic had been injected into my arteries by the nurse. Eventually, it went directly into my heart. This mistake caused my body to react violently, and my breathing and heartbeat began to become irregular. Suddenly, I heard a loud bang. It was as if my body had been torn apart. A strong force pulled me out of my body. My pain disappeared and the feeling was very relaxing. Suddenly, I heard the screams of the nurses. The nurse rushed out of the operating room, shouting as she ran. At that time, I didn't know what was happening. I started to feel confused and scared. Then, the doctors burst into my room. They used various devices to monitor my heartbeat and breathing while starting emergency treatment. I was like a bystander, standing next to the operating table. Around me, nurses were handling various equipment and medications. I could see their hands moving rapidly, and their faces wore expressions of concentration and tension. They were injecting some kind of drug into my body. Suddenly, a hand was pressed against my head. A man's voice told me, "It's time for you to get out of here." As the hand pressed on my head, I felt a mysterious force. I felt my soul become lighter. When I turned around, I didn't find anyone. I didn't know where the voice was coming from. I found no one around me except the doctor and the nurse. Suddenly, I appeared in a meadow. The grass around me was very high, almost up to my waist. A breeze blew by and I smelled a sweet aroma. I lay down on the grass and felt a sense of comfort I had never felt before. In this world, everything seemed to have life. Every tree, every leaf, every blade of grass has its own story. They showed me the beauty and infinite possibilities of life with their soft gestures. A huge tree suddenly appeared in front of my eyes, its height surpassing any tree I had ever seen. Its dense leaves seemed to cover the entire sky. The bark appeared to be made up of countless tiny lines, like a giant picture scroll. The branches were covered with fruits of all shapes and sizes, all glittering attractively. There were many small animals playing under the tree. As I walked under the tree, I felt a surge of energy pouring into my body. Here, time became eternal. I gazed at the bark of the tree and noticed that it was covered with countless tiny holes. I noticed that the lines on the bark were not stationary, but were writhing as if they were communicating with me. I started to climb up the roots of the tree. In the tree, I saw all kinds of life forms, which all found their homes in the trunk. The tree seemed to be a large nature library. I continued climbing upward. Here, I felt the mysterious power of the universe. I took a deep breath and closed my eyes. I felt myself merging into this tree of life and becoming a part of it. When I reached the top of the tree, I saw a huge cloud. It emanated a sacred aura, an aura that captivated me. The edges of the cloud emitted a faint white light. Suddenly, an unmistakable light penetrated the cloud. This light filled me with power and hope inside. The bright light in the cloud grew stronger and stronger, and my body began to glow as if the whole world was illuminated. I began to hear countless voices calling my name. These voices felt familiar and unfamiliar to me. A mysterious force was guiding me, and I slowly walked toward that light. The light was getting stronger and stronger, as if it was going to swallow everything. I was not afraid, but felt very calm. As I entered the light, I felt my soul began to vibrate incessantly, as if it was being illuminated and purified by a mysterious power. My thinking also became clear, as if my mind had entered a higher level of consciousness. I didn't know the source of this power, but I knew it was guiding me. In the light, I saw countless mysterious patterns and shapes, as if they were expressions of some kind of wisdom. Next, countless images flashed before my eyes. All were snippets of my past life, every second of which was recorded. I saw scenes of myself as a child, good times with friends and relatives, and difficulties I had encountered. These images seemed to be alive and kept surfacing before my eyes. These clips recorded my growth and experiences. I saw the dreams and goals I once had, and I also saw my current state and achievements. Suddenly, the voice reappeared. He asked me when was the most impressive moment in these images. I pondered for a moment and thought that moment would be the day I finished my doctorate. Suddenly, the image before me came to the day I graduated. I stepped onto the campus of my alma mater in a modest outfit. As I stood on the stage and received the certificate from my teacher, I felt a great sense of pride and excitement inside. People throughout the hall cheered and I felt their recognition of me. I could see the expressions of my family as they hugged me with excitement. My mother shed tears of excitement, and my father patted my shoulder with excitement. The voice reappeared and he asked me, "Is there more?" I felt a little confused, as if he wasn't too happy with the answer I gave. I remembered that I had won the downtown championship in a ski competition. The scene in front of me changed again. This time, I saw a snowy white mountain. The scene of my skiing appeared before my eyes and I felt the cold air brush against my cheeks. That speed made my heart beat faster, but I was still full of confidence and courage. Finally, I reached the finish line and became the skiing champion of our city. A cheer came from my side. The voice reappeared, and he didn't affirm or deny my actions. He simply said, "Let's see this." Suddenly, another image came to my eyes. It was a little boy who looked very thin and was wearing tattered clothes. He was squatting on the side of the road crying. The little boy looked very confused and I could feel his helplessness. I asked him, "Do you need help?" He nodded, and I started to take him to find his way home. On the way, I told him many interesting stories, hoping to distract him from his fear. Finally, we found his home. This incident was many years ago and I had long forgotten about it. He told me that learning to help others is the most important thing, as opposed to personal honor. When that voice said that, I began to reflect on my own life. I realized that I had been too focused on my own success and had neglected others around me. He asked me, "Did anyone help you in the process of earning your doctorate?" I thought about it for a moment. And indeed there were many people who helped me. The voice went on to say, "Your success is not just because of your own efforts, but also because of the support and help of others. Your achievements become meaningful when you can help others." I felt very ashamed. I realized that despite my success in some areas, I didn't seem to be doing well in helping others. The voice finally told me, "You have a lot to learn, and it's time for you to go back." I realized that my soul was beginning to move backwards. I was moving quickly away from this place. Once again, many images appeared before my eyes. I felt like I was traveling through the bonds of time and space, heading in an unknown direction. Suddenly, I felt pain in my body, as if something was tormenting me. I returned to my hospital bed. I slowly opened my eyes as doctors and nurses gathered around me. Later, I experienced a brief coma. It took a month for my health to slowly improve. My memory began to clear up and I remembered the mysterious voice and everything I had experienced. I realized that I needed to rethink my life. While my personal accomplishments made me proud, they didn't represent the whole of who I was. I needed to focus more on how I could help others and how I could become a better person. This time of pain and suffering taught me that the most important thing in life is not personal achievement, but how to make a positive impact on others. Later, I joined a volunteer organization to help people in need in any way I could. I also started to be active in some charity activities. I know that I still have a lot to learn, but I will keep going. On Christmas Day 1993, I went to the mall with my parents to buy the decorations we needed for Christmas. For a 10-year-old, Christmas can be one of the most anticipated holidays of the year. I always felt overwhelmed with excitement and anticipation during this holiday season. After the shopping was done, my father drove us home. I sat in the back and admired the bustling streets. My father drove intently while my mother chatted with him. Suddenly, I heard a loud bang, the car shook, and then I felt a strong vibration. I looked out the car window and saw that we had been hit by an ambulance. Then the car lost its balance and rolled over like a runaway toy car. I was thrown off and I felt my body spinning in the air. I hit my head on something with a dull thud. My consciousness began to grow fuzzy. I felt like I lost control of my body. I was free from my body and seemed to become an invisible observer. I saw the entire scene of the crash. To my surprise, I found that our car had been severely damaged. The window glass was also all broken. There was an ambulance parked next to it, and the front end was also severely damaged, with the entire front end dented. My heart was filled with confusion and fear. I saw my father collapsed in the car, pale and without any signs of life. I saw my mother, who was crying and calling my father's and my name over and over. Although my heart had stopped, the doctors did not give up on my treatment. The doctor kept performing CPR on me. Slowly, I felt a faint heartbeat. I was pulled back into my body by a force. My consciousness was still a blur. I could hear voices talking around me, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. I was rushed to the hospital. Upon arrival at the hospital, the doctors took me directly to the operating room. The doctors kept performing other treatment measures on me, but my condition did not get better. Suddenly, my heart stopped beating once again. Once again, I left my body and I could see everything inside the entire operating room. I saw the doctor's hands trembling a little and I knew my life was slowly passing away. I heard the voices of two doctors talking in low voices next to me. This child's brain had been severely damaged and he would probably become a vegetable. Even if he could wake up, it would have a great impact on his future life. I was very angry to hear this, and I felt that this doctor was completely talking nonsense. I wanted to tell them that I could hear them, but I couldn't speak. In the operating room, I saw a lot of medical equipment and tools. Doctors were surrounding me. I could see them opening an incision in my head and heard the sound of tools clashing. Suddenly, I felt a mysterious force appear around me. I saw an angel appear in the operating room. This angel had no wings and his eyes revealed an aura of peace. The angel came up to me, and he gently reached out his hand and touched my forehead, and my soul instantly felt a wave of peace. This angel carried a very pure energy, and his presence seemed to bring a breath of fresh air. I didn't know who this angel was or why he was here, but I knew that he was here to help me. His presence made me feel very warm. When I asked the angel about my father's news, the angel was silent for a while. Then he replied softly, "Your father is well." Hearing these words made my heart feel much lighter. But then the angel added, "He has gone to heaven." This news made me unable to believe my ears. I asked in confusion, "Do you mean that my father has passed away? Why did he leave me and my mother?" The angel patiently explained, "Your father's mission has been completed and he needs to go to the other world." I had a hard time accepting this explanation. I felt that my father had abandoned me and my mother. The angel reassured me, "Your father has not left you, he will always be there for you." I asked the angel to take me to see my father. The angel shook his head and told me that now was not the time for me to go to heaven. I had many important tasks to complete. He assured me that I would meet my father again at some point. I felt very frustrated and disappointed, not understanding why the angel would not take me to see my father. I begged him again to take me to my father. Finally, the angel agreed to my request. He told me that it was not an easy thing to do, but he was willing to help me make this wish come true. He also reminded me that this was only a short journey and that I had to be prepared for it. I nodded to show that I was ready. The angel took my hand in his. Next, we began to move upward. I passed through the white clouds and looked up to see a beautiful garden. Inside this garden, I saw all kinds of flowers and trees. Next to the garden, there was a clear stream. It was as if this was a world without troubles. I followed the angel into the depths of the garden. A house appeared in front of me. The house was exactly the same as my current home, from the exterior to the interior. The outer walls of the house were painted light blue. There was a tall oak tree in front of the door, with a thick layer of green grass under it. The door of the house was open, seemingly welcoming our arrival. I followed the angel into the room and saw a familiar family photo. In the photo, I saw me and my parents. The interior of the room was also identical to my house. The walls were pale yellow and the furniture was brown. There was a guitar hanging on the wall. I felt very warm and friendly, as if I was back in my own home. At that moment, there was a sound from outside the room. I knew it must be my father. I came out of the room and saw my father. He looked at me with a smile. He looked much younger than before. I was very excited inside. When I walked up to him, he took me into his arms and hugged me tightly. I buried my head on his shoulder and tears flowed uncontrollably. I whispered, "Daddy, can you come home with me? I want you and Mom to be with me." My father smiled and said, "Son, my time has come. I will be here for you and your mother. You need to move on with your lives, and you must take care of your mother." My father gently wiped away my tears and comforted me, saying, "Don't be sad, my son. I will always be by your side and protect you." My father went on to say, "Son, sometime in the future, both you and your mother will come here. This is also your home, and we will live here forever." After my father showed me around the house, he asked me, "Son, would you like to meet your grandfather?" My grandfather died before I was born, and there is no picture of him in the house. My father used to tell me interesting stories about my grandfather while I was sleeping, because he was an adventurer. I was curious about what kind of a person my grandfather was. I asked my father where we would have to go to meet my grandfather. My father smiled and said, "We are going to a special place." We came to a peaceful place. There, I saw a beautiful courtyard covered with flowers and green grass. My father took me by the hand and walked up the steps. In the corner of the garden, I saw my grandfather. He was sitting there with a travel photo in his hand and a warm smile on his face. As I walked up to my grandfather, he smiled at me and said, "Son, I've been watching you grow up. I know you are a brave child." He continued, "I know you want to be an adventurer too, just like me." Grandfather took out a map and told the story of his former experiences. Grandfather unfolded the map, pointing to the markings on it, said, "These are the places I have been. I have traveled through dense jungles and across treacherous rivers." Grandfather continued, "Son, if you have enough courage, you can also reach their dreams." My grandfather and I talked for a long time, which made me yearn for the unknown even more. My father tapped me on the shoulder and reminded me that it was time for me to go back. I knew that it was time for us to say goodbye. Grandfather stood up, walked slowly to us, took my hand and said gently, "Son, don't be afraid of the unknown, bravely follow your dreams." Finally, my grandfather turned and walked deeper into the garden, disappearing into the dense woods. I knew that it was time to say goodbye to my father. I hugged my father tightly, tears flowing continuously. My father gently patted my back and comforted me, saying, "Son, you must be strong, your mother still needs you. I believe you will be a good boy, a good husband and a good father." Then I assured him that I would take good care of my mother. My father smiled, nodded, and waved goodbye to me. When I returned to the hospital, I found myself in a coma for a week. My mother stayed at my bedside. The doctor told me that my surgery had been a success, but that I would need to rest for a while. For the next few days, I stayed in the hospital receiving treatment, with my mother by my side. Whenever I woke up, she was always waiting by my bedside, giving me encouragement and comfort. During the few days I was in the hospital, my mother never told me about my father's condition. But I knew in my heart that my father had left us. I often saw my mother secretly hiding in the corner and crying. I couldn't bear to see my mother so sad, and I told her about my experience of meeting my father in heaven. I was taken to heaven by an angel and met my father in a garden. There was a house exactly like our house. My mother did not believe what I said. She thought I was just hallucinating. Although I felt a little disappointed, I knew what I said was true. I told my mother again that I had also seen my grandfather in heaven. He was dressed in white, and his hair and beard were snow white. Grandfather's little thumb on his left hand was missing. Grandfather told me that it was an injury he had received during a rock climb. When my mother heard this, she acted surprised. Because she knew that my grandfather had died before I was born. It was very strange to my mother that I could describe in detail what he looked like and how he had been injured. I reassured my mother that my father was doing well in the other world. My father told me that we can't keep dwelling on our grief. We should try to live. He will always be waiting for us in heaven. My mother nodded and then hugged me tightly. A few days later, I left the hospital. Contrary to the doctor's prediction, I did not become a vegetable, but quickly recovered my health. I knew it was all a blessing from my father and grandfather in heaven.